Hello folks, my name's Ben, welcome to Shots Fired Airsoft. Now, hopefully you can hear me with the sound of my little 3D printer going in the corner. I have two printers now, and this video is going to be about what they can do for you in the hobby. Whether it be Airsoft, Nerf, or any other thing where you need some custom parts making. The reason I'm doing this video now is because the weather has been a bit terrible recently, haven't had much chance to get out, everything. I've got like 3 or 4 guns unboxed that I really need to actually get around to shooting and doing test firings on. But getting out there at the moment, every time I get a bit of time off work, the weather is terrible. So I'm going to take you a little aside from that and just go through my experiences with 3D printing and how we are doing and what you can do with it, because it's essentially an open-ended thing. If you can get your printer set up well and nail your settings down, you can do pretty much anything with what you've got. So one thing we're going to get into first is threaded adapters, which are very fine, and you may not originally think that you can actually 3D print these, but they do in fact work perfectly fine. So obviously you get your new gun, and it's a bit of a weird one. This is a double barrel G17L, and it's not got an overly common thread size on the barrel. So you can either order one from Lee's Machining, pay 16 to 20 quid maybe for one, and wait a few days for it to get here. But oh my word, you've got a game tomorrow night and you want this to have a tracer on it for indoors. If you have a 3D printer, about 15p in less than half an hour, you can actually have yourself a really rather nice fitting threaded adapter for your G17L. Now this is essentially based on stuff on things coming off Thingiverse and other places on the internet. Essentially, if you buy an airsoft gun and you have a threaded adapter you need, the chances are that someone's already come across it and they've made one of these to go on. Just to say, these threads are actually very precise, and I've not come across one that I've printed yet, as long as the settings are good, but will not accept accessories. Now, if you have an issue with your threaded adapter in terms of durability, even if it lasts 10 games, you can print another one and just replace it. We're not talking like something that's going to cost you 10 quid to do a time. So that is one of the simple sort of easy things which I can think of, which really it makes sense having a 3D printer for stuff like this, because you can make pretty much whatever you want. Moving away from that, you can also get quite fancy with them. So again, this is another example of one that's fairly difficult to find. Again, if you go to Lee's Machining, you can get one of these, and this is a 16mm to 14mm negative adapter, which goes on this TM Mark 23. Not TM, sorry, it's the ASG one that I've always had, that I've done the video on. Bit of a spoiler there because it's in a carbine case at the moment, but again, if you look at this one closely, if I can get focus, you'll see the detail and knurling that's on there, and that is all come off my little 3D printers. If I just pop that on there, the thread is absolutely marvellous on it. There's no hang-ups, nothing. And that enables you to do things like fit stupidly outsized home printed Osprey silencers, which are quite hilarious. This actually goes on this quite well, because the ridges in the in the body of the carbine actually go together quite well. Yeah, so moving on to my next point, I got considerably more advanced with 3D printing soon after doing stuff like this, and what it allowed me to do was start producing carbine kits. Now, I've got a thing about carbine kits. I like the idea of having a lightweight primary that's actually a sidearm in a case that makes it a lot easier to handle said sidearm. So on this, there is an M4 buffer tube attachment on the back, which just takes a standard M4 buffer tube. You get a bit of rail across the top, a bit of rail across the bottom, and then obviously you have the front end open for any accessories you may require. The fact that you can whip one of these out in about 15 hours at the most, slap a Mark 23 in it, and if it happens to be a modified Mark 23, this is a very effective, very lightweight, sort of almost sniper, depending on the level of modification on your Mark 23 primary, which is fantastic. Only real issue, only disadvantage this tends to have is it's only ever going to have the 30 sort of round magazines for the Mark 23. So that is something there which is really rather groovy. This is my present sort of CQB primary, and this is my long-term Army Armament R17 with numerous Garda parts in it, essentially try and bring it up a bit more to TM spec. And it is in this rather enormous carbine kit, which is somewhat larger than the sort of thing that you would find carbine kits being. So like normally your only kits are a bit smaller than this. This turns it into essentially a full-on primary. There's plenty of space in the front should you wish to run an extended barrel or anything along those lines to lift the power up. However, this hits about 300-310 FPS, so for CQB it's perfect. I've got an emergency front grip on it because I've used something else on it, and obviously it has an M4 buffer tube stock attachment on it. Your charging handle is back here, and that is really all you need. It doesn't have an exposed mag release. I've knocked it around a bit, you can see scratches on it, but it doesn't have an external mag release, slide release. You don't need one on a pistol. I've seen people do this kit and then they cut the big chunk out the side so you can get to the slide release, and it's like really unnecessary. But yeah, so that's just another thing. That is my active everyday use. This has seen about 5 or 6 games now, and there's a few marks on it, but the whole thing is very, very strong. There is a glue joint down the middle. Unfortunately, I don't have a printer big enough to actually print this in one piece. But that's just an example of what we can do. And then I got a little bit more into modelling and model adjustment. So what this is a miniature kit based off the same style as that larger kit. So this would be something like a 19 short slide or similar, or you can still run a 17 and it will fit. But this is just an overall very, very small package compared to that extremely long nosed one. And this was done in Tinkercad, just getting in there, adjusting the rail sizes and cutting the front down to length and making sure everything's still lined up. And when you run a 17 in this, it is a lot smaller package, a lot closer to the body and a lot more, well, handleable really. But I prefer the longer length just because it's an ergonomic I'm used to, what we're using long Nerf blasters over the years. But for someone who's used to like an MP7 or something like that, this is a lot more sort of what they will be used to. Short, loud, and quite entertaining. A bit of a sneak preview of one that I'm working on at the moment for a friend. This is not a finished article. However, this is actually a kit, again off Thingiverse, for an AAP01. And this has numerous nice little touches to it. We've got a really long front barrel on it, which replaces the original front barrel of the AAP. So this does not sleeve over, it is actually replacing the entire front. And inside there is about enough room in the centre of this to run a really long barrel. At the moment it's got a 150mm maple jet in it to replace the standard barrel, and sorry, not a maple jet, a maple leaf crazy jet barrel in there to give it a bit more poke indoors. We have a huge rail going all the way down the gun, and a lot of lower room. Coming around the back, probably the most interesting thing about this setup is it actually has an M4 buffer tube on it, but it is a droop stock, or a drop stock. So if you have your face guard, face shield on, you can actually drop that down and get an easier sight line down the, well, whatever sight you choose to run on it. This is a bit more of a complex 3D print. It's been quite troublesome at times, but it does fit the AAP very well. You can see it uses the original rail accessory holes. Allows for the rear sight plate, which of course is what mounts the blowback unit in these, so you cannot remove that unless you replace it with a blanking plate or a or somewhere getting a screw thread to hold in place. I do have a charging handle that's printed for this, which will stick out of this side so you can rack it back, and again just got a standard M4 buffer stock on it. Please ignore the hardware in this, I have not yet got around to sorting it out. But yes, that is going to be quite an effective little piece for indoors. And it should be quite entertaining. I say I play primarily CQB, and doing this sort of stuff is great fun, and it doesn't half make a difference to the way you play. So what problems can you come across 3D printing? Well, 3D printing is a bit of a fickle art. If your printer is set up well out of the box, you have good quality filament, and I cannot stress this enough. A lot of the problems people have, and a lot of the filament issues that people have, tend to be with water in the filament, and a lot of these filaments these days come having been sat in warehouses, they've been sat on boats coming from China, they've all this sort of stuff. And for some reason, even the ones that are sealed, they can have an enormous amount of moisture in. So just for an example, this is not a comment on who makes this. SFA filament in general. So this is a PETG that I bought to experiment with PETG. So PETG is a bit more, you see actually where I've melted the spool trying to get this to dry out, but PETG is sort of like supposedly stronger than PLA. Now everything you've seen printed that I've shown you here is made out of PLA Plus, which is a halfway house between PETG and PLA. So it's supposed to be stronger than PLA, but not quite as strong as PETG. But it has a little bit more elasticity to it. So one of the strengths of PETG is the fact that it does have a decent amount of flexibility, which helps it not break when it's dropped, like once things are printed. The only problem with this is that if you're doing a catch, if you're doing something that needs to stay where it is, PETG is not going to do that for you. It will move around. So PETG is essentially water bottle plastic, and you know how flexible that is. Obviously that's very thin. If you print it thicker, it does get stronger. But there is always a certain amount of natural elasticity and deflection that this will have. The main problem I had with this filament is that it is very wet. It came out of its sealed bag absolutely soaking wet, which means that when you run it through the extruder, it bubbles and it actually boils the water away in the filament and leaves you with a holy mess on the other end. I don't know if you can actually see that end. That is the end that was in the hot end, and you can see how it's kind of degraded, and the surface of it is very mottled, and that is all the water coming out of the filament. This was quite unfortunate, but I really know I just need to invest in some high quality PETG to really experience what PETG is like. My Ender 3 V2s, I've got two of them, it's what I print on. They can just about handle PETG. The printers themselves are about £270, so it's not the end of the world expensive to get into these days 3D printing. As I say, as long as you build it right, you can print things straight out of the box, which are great quality as long as the model is good and the slicer software you use is good. I use a program called Cura, and I've absolutely no issues whatsoever using that, and it has never really given me bad prints. Only bad models have given me bad prints. So just a bit of a shout out here, I almost exclusively use ESON PLA Plus these days, and this is a fantastic filament, comes in lots of different colours. This is the fantastic blood red, which prints in this sort of shade, and you can actually see there I've used that to make a gear piece for a heart gear, and it comes out really well. These edges are actually quite sharp, you know, which is quite a good display of definition. If there's anything else I've got here to hand, this is a filament spool that I've also done out of the same filament, and it's nice and flexible when it's printed this thin, but it's not going to essentially break. Where it is printed, it is difficult to bend it in an area where it's not supposed to bend. So essentially this is printed so that these are flexible to pop inside a spool holder and then hold itself there. But as you'll see, if I hold it down and then try and push it like that, you'll see it does not want to flex. It's good strong filament, a little bit more flexible than PLA, not as flexible as PETG, but because of that you can still use it in situations where you need to use PLA. I've had no problems with hydroscopic effects on this, so it doesn't seem to want to take in water. A lot of these have just been open in the box, no covering, just got a silica gel packet in there. They are really good. If you're going to print a Carbine kit or anything like that, I would suggest doing it in ESON PLA Plus. It seems to work really well with the Ender 3s, or at least the Ender 3 V2s, like I've got. One of the best things you can do when you're starting out printing is, if you've got no idea whatsoever, you can hop online and you can actually find people's profiles for various different filaments and the situations you're using them in. The other thing you can do is you can change the firmware on your printer. So when the Ender 3 V2 came out, for some reason they absolutely knackered the firmware on it. They actually removed a lot of options and a lot of people weren't happy about it. I run what's called JYERS or JYERS, JYERS firmware on my printers now. Essentially it gives you all the options back and more, so I can do a lot more with my printer just through the little control panel than I originally could in any other way. This includes changing settings whilst printing and all sorts of other stuff, so if you're having a bit of an emergency or you notice that something's going wrong halfway through a big print, you've actually got a chance of saving it. That brings me on to my next point. 3D printing can be a bit heartbreaking. Some of these parts are going to take you over 24 hours to print. Some of these big gun receivers and all that sort of stuff, they can be a bit of a nightmare. And it's probably best to bear in mind that if your print gets to 20 hours out of 24 and fails, the only thing you can do is just try again. And there's lots of reasons that print can fail. It can be either because you have a filament hang up, so essentially the feet of the extruder, or through the extruder to the hot end gets interrupted. You can actually run out of filament when you misjudge how much you've got left on a roll, especially with a bigger print where you think, oh, there's enough on there, and actually you're going to run out, not much from the end. I've had a couple of parts do that, which is really, really annoying. So I've put it on, gone to work, come back, and it's I've got like I don't know, 11 12 finished items sat on the thing with it having merrily thought it's finished, and it hasn't. Some printers do have filament sensors, but it's a bit much. Another thing is when you set up your bed adhesion. I've got a newer Ender V3 V2, and the bed on that seems to have stayed good. My earlier one, it actually requires me to use hairspray to get the print to stick, and this is a bit of a problem. But I still get really good printers out of it. It's also, that is the one that has actually been changed over to direct drive, so essentially it can print TPU and other flexible filaments a lot better than it could if it was just the original Bowden setup, which is where it's fed through a long cable all the way to the hot end. This causes issues with, obviously on flexible filament, the filament will actually sort of curve, rather than try and push forward through the hot end, it will just go blah, 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 like that, and sort of like just do this rather than pushing forward into the hot end. So you end up with nozzle clogging and all sorts of other stuff. So what can you achieve at the absolute sharp end of 3D printing? What is the eventual end game? For me, it was always going to be the ability to buy a hardware kit, or even go and find the hardware myself and build guns and blasters from scratch. So essentially no manufacturer input whatsoever. I'm getting better with modelling, and I'm really quite enjoying myself. I do need to get into Fusion or Blender though, because they allow you to do so much more with your modelling, and also make sure that when you print, your models are going to be great. However, I did have one thing that I wanted to show you just before I go. This is my new Nerf primary. So this is a full-blown Nerf gun. There is no manufacturer input on this. It is a hardware kit from Herbmeister Arms on Etsy, and all the 3D printed parts are my own. So the catch is 3D printed, the piston's 3D printed, the turnaround's 3D printed, the body is completely 3D printed, and it's all held together with this hardware kit. And printing finish on it, I think, came out really well. There will be a full video on this, including about the build and all that sort of jazz, but I absolutely love it. I think it's fantastic, and the fact that this has all come out of a roll of filament on my printer is just blowing me away. Always has done, always will do. Ever since I had that 3D printed high capper, to be honest, years before that, I've always wanted to get into 3D printing, and this is something that I've wanted to achieve for a long time. Even down to the double stacked jungle clips for the mag. So these are essentially just a set that allows you to run two, because obviously one of the issues that we actually get in Nerf is capacity. So we're firing 50 caliber foam darts, doesn't matter whether it's short darts or long darts, the caliber remains the same, which means that these can only hold about 15 rounds. You can get longer ones, but the blaster's starting to get bulky at this point. So two of these together that sit side by side in the back of the blaster mean that you can just pop out and you've got another 15 rounds. Fantastic, and it's all done with 3D printed parts. But I don't want to go too far into this because there is an awful lot to say about it, and I want to save that for a full video. Performance is great, it looks great in my opinion, and the other thing is I get to pick my colours, because very few people in the Nerf hobby want to print all black blasters. For me, I play indoors at CQB and I want an all black blaster. It's quite rare in the Nerf world. If you post this on Nerf or something like that, you're going to get people going, oh, it's black, and it's like, well, yes it is, it fits my thing, I don't use it outside. So I want it to look like a firearm. Sorry if that offends anyone, but that's just my thing. Thank you for watching my little sort of semi-boring tattling on about 3D printing. However, I think it's just about the coolest thing going in any hobby at the moment, and it allows you to do so much. So I implore you that if you are into airsoft, Nerf, paintball, anything like that, anything like this. I haven't even gone over things like rail accessories. It's like you print your own rails, you can have rail adapters, you can do all that sort of stuff. You can do it all straight off your printer. You don't need to buy anything anymore. It's quite stunning what you can do. So this is a front grip that I've actually 3D printed, and this has got what's called a fuzzy skin. So when you wear a glove, it is really, really grippy. It's like having a stippled grip almost. And despite being skeletal and really quite lightweight, this is actually strong enough to prime a knife blaster on a 14 kilo spring. So I haven't got any higher than that, but I think you could probably get away with 18. But if it will do that, it will last forever on the front of your M4. That's just something I wanted to show you. Again, that's another one of my sort of main pieces of 3D printing. So yeah, if you're thinking about 3D printing, but you're a bit worried about getting into it, I am a complete and total noob to it. I've done no 3D modelling, no 3D printing before about, when I first get one, about June. And we've gone from having nothing to a fully produced, home-built 3D printed blaster in about 5 months. And it could have been sooner than that. But I really wanted to make sure I got it right before I attempted it. So, video coming up soon on this, firing test for all the other things. Sorry it's been so long, I am getting to it. Thank you again, and goodbye.